Okay, for those joining our live stream a little bit later than we expected, been a complicated day. This is a fairly detailed meeting about design of Wolfram Language for the future. Here's the issue. If you make a plot and you say plot square root of x, x goes from minus 10 to 10, it does that, which is pretty reasonable. If you say plot square root of minus x squared, it does that, and it gives no message, which is kind of confusing. And I think, let's see, do we have an example here? I think we have an example. What is this? This is, okay, that time series. Let's see, date, list, log plot of that probably works. Whereas date, list plot of log of %3 for some reason doesn't work. Why doesn't that work again, Brett?
I would guess that log of time series isn't doing anything.
Well, log of time series is doing something. It's just you end up with log of quantity of n people.
And that's right.
Interpreted by dateless plot because it's a transcendental function, and we.
Right. So if you do normal of log of data.
Wait a minute. So if I say here normal.
No, I'm saying if you do normal of log of data, then you'll see what the structure is that.
Yeah, that's kind of goofy. Okay. All right, so let's take this from the top. The first thing is this behavior here, where you actually are getting nothing out.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm claiming that in that case, we should generate a message because it's completely unclear why you got nothing out. Let's try another example. Plot A, x minus 10 to 0 to 10, for example.
It'll be the same.
Right. That's really confusing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should generate a message that said, did not have a real numeric value.
I mean, we already have such a message for like n integrate, did not evaluate to a numeric value over the whole. I forget what the message is.
Well, let's just try it for this case, right? So this case should give that. It's a little bit pompous, that message, but it's basically says the right thing. Yeah, I mean, that's basically the message that I would propose to generate in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, I don't think anybody necessarily disagrees with that.
That's a first. Okay, good.
No, I mean, I think.
Right now, the more I mean, I suppose there's a possible issue with manipulates now pinking if there are certain magic values which produce empty plots. So that's one possible.
Oh, that's an issue. That's an interesting issue. So I don't think it should return unevaluated. I think it should generate the empty plot, but I think it should produce the message and then generate the empty plot.
Right.
Right.
But the manipulates would pink due to the message being issued, right?
Oh gosh. What would they do? Would they pink and show the empty plot, or would they just pink?
They would pink and show the empty plot.
Yes.
I don't think that's terrible. What do people think there? Well, I can see cases where that would be kind of ugly.
I mean, if you wrapped it in quiet, then it wouldn't.
You don't necessarily know to do that, and the problem is that if what happens, okay, so we all agree, I think that. I think this is not a bad case because this is the case for plot. I mean, if there's a graphics, okay, so let's consider a different case, okay, which may already have some messaging mechanism. So if I say graphics of point of AB, comma, point of CD.
It will pink box and you'll get a message that tells you that AB is not a coordinate.
What the hell is that cell context backtick A? Looks like a bug to me.
Not sure.
Right, I think it's the fact that it's, you did that, it's looking at the boxes and now it's treating A as a, trying to interpret A as a number, right? The front end is trying to interpret that.
Right, the front end A is divorced from the kernel A at this point, or something.
You should look at that. That's pretty ugly.
Right, but that's front end behavior, right? That has.
No, I understand that, but I don't understand why it's committing itself to the context there. Why is it even displaying the context? I don't think it should. I think cell context should, in effect, if that's what it's going to be by default, it should, in effect, be on the context path and not display. Am I making sense?
I'm not prepared to rule on that without more thought.
Okay. Okay, who's going to take that to the front end team for?
I can take that.
Okay.
Right. I think the other major issue is, suppose in your plot A, X from 0 to 10, what happens if you give the list A, comma 1?
Yeah.
Not here. I can't quite see. Is that in of 7?
Yeah.
Yes. If you put in a list of A and a 1.
Interesting. I do think a message will be useful here. Otherwise, it's like, where's that other line?
Right. So if you add plot, legends goes to expression, then I think you will see both of them in the legend.
Yeah, okay. So what's your point? In this case, you wouldn't want to generate a message? I don't think it would be harmful to generate a message.
Well, it's not obvious. Well, I guess my claims are it's not a priori obvious whether or not it should issue a message, and B, right, because you could not see it because you put in, a silly plot range, right, and then it's just not in your.
Yeah.
But and also then I'm not sure how we necessarily detect this. So there's a
detect what? So wait a minute. You're saying if you see nothing, we all agree we should give a message.
Yes.
If you see a vestigial, tentacle of the thing, like a legend that shows it should have been.
No. My point is that if you're only plotting one function, it's easy to tell whether there's nothing in the graph.
Yes.
If there are two things being plotted, I don't know that it's a priori easy to tell that.
Brett, can you comment on that, please? I would have thought you could try sampling each one, and
Well, but the thing is that just because it didn't evaluate at one point doesn't mean that it didn't evaluate anywhere.
Wait. You make a pass. You're trying to reduce this plot to a bunch of points, right? You do that sequentially for each of the elements of that expression list, correct? And so for each element of that expression list, you see whether it produced nothing over the plot range. And
I mean, in the case of plot, I think we should be able to detect that an individual function did not generate anything.
So let's keep going. Where would you not be able to do that?
I don't know. There's 130 visualization functions, and
all right, fine.
they take different paths to the final graphic.
Okay, we'll talk about that, but let's. Okay, so I think we're agreeing that even in this case, it wouldn't be bad to have a message. Now, if there are 8 different things, I think we'll let it go to the stop message, right? If there are lots of different ones Am I making sense? I mean, I don't know what happens here if I do this. If I say A, B, C here.
I think it treats it as a single. Nope. So.
Okay, so it just goes ahead and hits the stop message. I don't think that's terrible. Thoughts for the graphics case?
I mean, I would probably, what I would probably view as nicer is we detect if any of them and then issue a message using the whole thing, that it contained elements that didn't, that were never plottable.
Okay.
I mean, to some extent, this is getting too close to the old V5 and earlier behavior.
Which is what?
So this is when your plot of square root of minus x squared, would have complained at every point.
Yeah, that's
and it was what, plot planar, and you were guaranteed to hit general stop, and you even got messages for that plot of square root of x because of the minus 10 to 0 case.
Yeah. Okay. Right. All right. So I agree with you that aggregating is a good thing. Okay, so let's look at a couple of other cases here. Okay, so I think we want to generate a message. Okay, so what we're agreeing is we definitely want to generate a message where the whole thing is blank. If there is one of the expressions is missing, one or more of the expressions are missing, we would like to generate a message. Mm-hmm. But in all cases, we want to minimize the number of messages generated. Now, if it's ABC, where C has a valid value, but A and B don't, what do we want to do there?
I mean, in that case, the message will be worded in a way that it will say that ABC contained, at least one component that wasn't plottable.
That's lazy. Surely we can say.
Yeah, maybe.
I think we should try.
I'd have to experiment with some things, but we might be able to.
Okay. All right. So let's go down. Let's look at the dateless plot for a minute here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty much the same story for this case here. But I'm very confused by the x-axis in this case, because the x-axis had points here. Why did it ignore them?
So
it auto-scaled to the most recent second, even though this went back to 1600 AD.
Well, I think it just deleted all of the data, right? If it found.
I think it determined that the data wasn't plottable and didn't even get the X ranges out of it. Which, I mean, should be improvable.
Okay. It seems desirable to improve that, but the most important thing here is
to get
in this case, we generate a message.
Yep.
Okay.
So this is a little bit more tricky, because at least in this concrete one, because people per BIBM/NIST documents is a unit that in the SI can be considered to be having the value 1.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to claim that's separate, Michael. I mean, that's
maybe
an issue for Nick or whatever.
Let's talk about, okay, is Nick here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute, okay? Because the question is, should the visualization functions, when they hit a thing that has unit CRUD in it, try to make those substitutions in an attempt to make it numerical? There's an argument that we need. Okay, so here's an interesting question. If I take that thing, okay, this is one of these horrifying philosophical questions. You can guess what I'm going to do. If I do that, should it de-peopleify it? Do you see what I'm saying?
No.
Will normal de-peopleify it, or is people?
No, I don't think so. I think that we have no function that de-peopleifies right now.
Right,
because the quantity isn't the outermost thing.
Right.
What do you mean the quantity isn't the?
Well, I mean, if
it's inside the log.
Because it's a log of people.
But
so the quantity, magnitude, and whatnot can't.
But isn't the question whether, so people is an independent unit, right? So it's
Is
not.
it?
No.
So if you actually try normal on that, you'll get log of the value, because people are treated as a special case unit like our dimensionless values are. So normal of quantity 3 dozens becomes a pure number, and we have special cases for special counting units, and people is one of those ones we considered similar enough to a number that it can be normalized and factored out.
Interesting. So in fact, if we were to put normal in at the right place, this would work in plotting functions.
Right. So in a 5, I guess, if you put a / normal, that will presumably work. No.
Because the normal doesn't go deep enough.
Oh, you need to
It's not going inside the time series.
Inside the time series.
Because I see. So normal. Okay. So look, this looks to me like it's a detailed issue with plotting. That plotting has to be able to take. I don't know exactly what the heuristic is, but it has to be able to take things that have, embedded quantities and try and normalify them.
Well, but I mean, what if it's not people? What if it's dollars?
In that case, we don't factor out the units. We have basically special case handling in normal that deals with quantities that are quote unquote essentially numbers.
Okay, but in fact, in this plot case of the dateless plot, what we might want to do is squash out the units and just plot the magnitudes. Right? And indeed, in dateless log plot, that's exactly what we're doing. What would it do if I had something? Okay, hold on. Let's type. Does that work? Magnificent. Okay, so now let me say date list log plot of that. Okay, that worked. Why did it not show a unit on the y-axis?
Because we don't add them to ticks at the moment.
Right. I mean, if you add axes label goes to automatic.
Or frame label goes to automatic.
Yes, frame label goes to automatic. It'll give it to you. Although I suppose that's would be a slightly deceptive. Or no, those values are the actual
it's
dollars.
still correct.
So that would be right. Yes.
Yeah, those values are dollars.
Yes, those values are dollars. So that would be correct.
Okay, so this all just worked, and it correctly extracted units without getting confused with a log. By the way, person on a live stream, Prime Vegero, hard to read, made one comment earlier. As someone who teaches Wolfram Language to students, this feature of generating a message when nothing comes out in the plot would be very helpful. We agree, it's going to happen. Second comment is, shouldn't quantity magnitude be changed so that it removes the units? And I think the point being made there is that in a case like this, right, why would quantity magnitude? Okay, so that's an interesting question, which actually I was sort of implicitly thinking about, but not explicitly. What should that do?
I think generically that's the right behavior. This one is special for 2 cases. A, because people is one of this counting unit that's allowed to be set to 1 within users within the and related to the SI. And the second one, because log makes it at worst case additive.
What do you mean by that? I mean,
compared with sign.
Right. Well, generically, I would argue that any non-trivial elementary function, right, cannot take anything other than dimensionless units.
Right. That's a rephrasing what I wanted to say. Yes.
Okay, but hold on. Let me unravel that for a second. Okay. So your claim is, I mean, sign, for example, could perfectly well. I mean, there are plenty of real life cases where it takes a time for instance.
No, it never takes a time. It takes a time times a frequency. So
Fair
it's
enough.
dimensionless.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, okay. Are you saying that log is the only reasonable? Okay, well, let's walk through this for a second. What are some other examples of counting units?
Baskets.
Baskets, did you say?
Yeah, for food, there are plenty of counting food units.
Dozen.
What?
Slices of bread.
So those generally.
Okay, what about web hits, for example? Is that a counting unit?
I think so.
Okay, so what I'm trying to understand, what's that?
Percent? Is that, I mean, are we looking at counting or are we looking at dimensionless?
What's the difference?
Michael?
Well,
counting.
Radians are dimensionless, but they're certainly not counting units.
Correct.
Okay, so normal does that.
Yeah.
So if I say, I mean, that would not be an unreasonable thing to do. I mean, let's say I say sine of 67% of pi. Oh, that just worked. Why did that work?
Because we have transcendental handling for dimensionless values.
Why did it change it into cosine here? Oh, because it reduced it. Sorry. Go ahead.
Right. So in terms of normal and general transcendental functions, we have special case handling for dimensionless values like a dozen or percent, and for angle and solid angle units, so radians, steradians, and people. Otherwise, we generally handle the units as being a case where transcendental functions don't.
So wait, why did that work? I mean, that did exactly the right thing. Why did that work?
Because it's dimensionless.
It's dimensionless. The percent is effectively just a numeric prefix for it. It's working because the percent times pi is evaluating.
Oh, I see. That multiplication is evaluating.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it was 67
web hits or something,
web hits or cows or bytes, it would.
Oh, wait. Cows are independent units. Cows are not in this category.
Right. Yeah. It's a different. Yeah.
What is the difference between a slice and a cow, Michael?
There is no, just there's a finite number of them that we need to express our own things as results, for instance, in food. But there are, of course, many, many more things that one could in principle. And cows we could in principle put in because there are probably data in country data that gives the approximate number of cows.
What about, yes, I was just going to ask about goats because, don't we know the number of goats in France?
Right. And this is kind of why we created independent unit for counting units, where you can basically say that the qualification of an independent unit is that it is a unit that exists but doesn't have any meaningful conversions. You can't convert cows to chickens unless you want to specify some arbitrary ratio of saying my cow to chicken ratio is X cows divided by whatever.
But so arguably that result there is wrong. Yes. Arguably that result should be in units of goats.
Yeah.
Unless the property name is number of goats, in which case it could be a number.
Right.
Okay, but let's imagine we had goats there. Then, and you want to use a visualization function. So the pure visualization function, when there is an independent unit there, will work fine, correct? Mm-hmm. The only time it won't work is when you encrust it with a log, for example.
Right. You've tried to do some transformation where that transformation itself hasn't done anything.
Right. Okay. So what do we think we should do here? So the problem is, what if you try to visualize log of 10 to the 7 people? Should we ignore the units in that case or not? We know to ignore the units if it is a top-level quantity object. We don't know to ignore the units if it's encrusted. And the argument is,
we're not ignoring the units. We're just able to
factor out the units.
See that they're there and account for them.
All right, okay. So your point is, if that was with a log, are you saying that we can factor, we can factor the units out because it is an additive thing. It makes some sense to factor them out because it would just shift the plot, right?
Right.
If that was an array function, for example, it makes no sense at all to factor out the units. It's just garbage.
You can't factor it out.
All right. So this case of the log there is going to be the unique case where this might make sense.
Good.
Okay,
and I will claim that it is so unique that we shouldn't try to handle it.
Well, we could generate a custom message. Because the fact is, the right way to handle it is to use the log plot mechanism, a log plot function.
But not all functions have log plot equivalence.
I understand that. But in the case where they do, it will be super helpful to people to tell them use the log plot version. All right, look, it's a luxury feature. I would, if we can do it, to notice that there's a log on the outside and say, try using the log plot version in cases where there is a log plot version, I think that will be a lovely luxury feature.
Right.
Okay. Otherwise, we'll just quote that it's that. Now, in the case of the message for a data function, what are you going to actually give in the output? Because you're not going to list you're not going to go and list, the 10,000 points that weren't numerical. Am I making sense?
Right. Well, I mean, potentially it might.
Yeah, well, that's bad because we don't want that, do we?
Well, I mean, it will get handled by $message preprint, and so you won't see, a screen full of error message. It'll get shortened and shallowed down to something small.
Okay. If you think that will work, fine. All right. Can we just have a quick review of other visualization functions, and then we might be able to wrap up here? I think this was fairly simple. Can we take a look? Where's a good list of all visualization functions? Just to see what other horrors there are.
Yeah, let's start with, hit a couple of guide pages. So data viz, probably all roughly the same. Whether it's list plot or
array plot? What about array plot? Array plot doesn't need this mechanism because it turns red, doesn't it?
Right. Although if the entire plot is red, it may still be useful to.
I agree.
Issue a message.
I mean, let's just take a look at what that looks like, actually. Oh gosh, that's a horrible mess. Yeah, that is not a very helpful picture. That should generate a message.
Yes.
Now, the other case that is obscure in that case is something where I'm saying, table 0, 100, 100. And then I say, replace part like 1, 1. What did I just do here? I didn't mean 0. I meant A there. That's definitely on the somewhat obscure end of things. Do we care?
My opinion is that's not going to give a message.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's somewhat unfortunate because it's going to be people wondering where that spec is.
Yes.
But I don't think there's a lot of choice about that.
No.
Okay. Timeline plot. What on earth would that do here? I see that a blank timeline should give a message, presumably.
Right.
Now, hold on a second. Let's be clear. There could be a plot where there is nothing, where it's a perfectly valid. Okay, let me show you a different case here. We say list plot, random real 10, 22. Okay, dandy. Okay, now we say plot range, arrow, 30, 40, 40, 50. Okay, now we're going to be blank.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what do we want to do in this case? Does that give a message or not? I think probably not.
I don't think so. I think...
I think it shouldn't give a message, because if there's a manipulate, it may often scoot out to outside or out of range. Like,
okay, so here's another quick case for you, Stephen, which I know which way I lean, but we'll see which way you lean. So list plot of empty list.
yeah, I think that shouldn't give a message.
Right. So the message is, it looked like there should have been something, but there wasn't. As opposed to there was nothing there to start with.
No, if there are non-trivial things, the things couldn't be plotted.
Right. You know, there were things that couldn't be plotted, not there's no output in the result.
If there weren't things, there's nothing to be said.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I could imagine somebody wondering, you know, they obviously had an upstream error. They could have had an upstream error, or this could have been as intended.
Right. You know, so the other
think that most upstream errors of this type, I mean, this is a good example of the thing that we're hoping to develop, this exception mechanism where there are messages that are off by default. This would be a good thing to note down. If Sushma is here, maybe note it down for the exceptions discussion as a message that's off by default.
Okay.
Right. I mean, so the other behavior we have right now is if you do like bar chart of A.
Okay.
Which is going to return unevaluated. Not a list, just A. Do we want to change that to return an empty graphic? Which, I mean, is easy enough.
Well, I'm just think about it. I mean,
listplot, I think, does the same thing.
No, I think that's perfectly decent behavior. I can't imagine. I mean, it's just not structurally reasonable. And I tend to think this is good behavior. Anybody want to comment on that? Anybody disagree with that statement?
Seems reasonable. So here's another case.
Okay, this is inconsistent. Sorry, I just
yes, and I'm sure there are cases, you know, that were inconsistent.
Okay, so that will be the principle then, that if it's a structurally loony, then it returns unevaluated with a message.
Right.
Okay. So suppose you were set A equal to empty list, and then you plot A.
What does that have to do with anything? These functions don't have hold attributes, so, or you mean plot, or?
Do you mean plot?
I meant literally plot.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I was jumping back to your list plot example. So I think we probably agree that if we had literally put the empty list in there, that we probably don't want a message, because why is it different from list plot? Although
right.
maybe
Ideally, this should not give a message.
This case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, even though you're right, because it evaluates to something which isn't invalid. I mean, which is just doesn't have anything in it. That should be fine. I mean, that's an implementation issue.
That's not obvious.
What's not obvious?
Because like your statement, it evaluates, that's not obvious from the documentation. For a user, that's not clear that it does evaluate.
I mean, at some point, it has to evaluate, Michael.
But at some point, yes.
Yes.
But what is your point?
And to be honest, Michael, I would, you know, we have code within plot that does, you know, an initial trial, you know, sample.
Yes, but what I'm saying is, like, if we don't say when we evaluate, then it's unclear for the user if there should be a message or not. If it does evaluate, then should be no message because there's an empty list. If it does not evaluate, then we have the case that the supplied function never evaluates to a valid plotting thing.
You're arguing, you're claiming that What are you claiming? That this might evaluate to unevaluated?
No,
so to
like,
speak?
like if this should give a message depends on a detail that we don't document. The detail being when is A evaluated? In the beginning after localizing X or at each X value? It depends on
Are
this.
you sure we don't document that?
No.
But I don't think that's relevant, right?
Why not?
Because
If it evaluates initially, it's an empty list and then it shouldn't give a message. If it evaluates later, then all values evaluated are not plottable and it should give a message.
I think that's overly no, because if it evaluate, so now you're going to claim then that if A is defined instead of an empty list as B, 1, then it should not issue a message because it evaluated to something, and all of those guys, and at least one piece of it plotted at every point.
Look,
I mean, it has to be. I mean, you can know that it has to evaluate early because if you give a list of 2 things, then it uses 2 different colors rather than 1.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does. Apparently, you haven't. No. We're talking about the case where you set A equal to the list x squared.
If it can.
Sure.
Oh, okay, good.
what do you
But
mean
it
if
cannot
can?
always evaluate.
That'll be one color.
Right. So why does that is really weird, Brett. That is really weird. I mean, I've noticed this and I didn't understand what on earth was happening. Okay, explain.
I don't know that I can give a concise explanation of it.
But that's my point. This
Yes.
difference.
That's utterly obscure. What just happened there? Does anybody else want to comment on this? I mean,
Well, the answer is that right, a special case was put in for the case where A has where the expression is a symbol which has own values. Right. Otherwise, it treats it as if it's plotting a single thing. Right. So in the case,
yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate. I mean, this would be very good if this could dig down a bit more to find out that it's actually plotting 2 things.
We could just remove the hold
possibility
attribute.
of that. What's that?
I said we could just remove the hold attribute.
Yeah, well, that would cause all kinds of problems. No, but seriously, to what extent could you actually do controlled evaluation of this? And to what extent will the modern type system, for example, allow you to answer this question?
I don't know enough about the modern type system to.
You might raise that with Tom, see what he has to say about it. We may be able to get much closer to solving this problem.
Right.
Okay, I want to come back to, so that's a pretty horrifying thing. I hope that's in possible issues for plot, by the way.
I think something along those lines is in the docs.
Okay, all right. So my position about this thing about whether it gives a message or whether it doesn't, I think we should let the chips fall as they may for right now. We can revisit this at a different time, but let's do whatever this will naturally do based on what we're implementing.
Mm-hmm.
You had a comment on the live stream from Sander here about essentially verbosity level flags. Actually, we have a plan to put in a large number of messages off by default and use those as an exception mechanism. I'm not a big believer of error level flags because having seen that like 40 years ago in software, because it's like, what's the level? Okay, to some people, that's a verbose and irrelevant message. To other people, that's the most important message ever. Some messages are pedantic and obscure and say, oh, that was a complex number. And other people say, well, of course it was a complex number. That's no problem. And I don't think there's a linear ordering of message obscurity. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, I think the other thing is, especially within Wolfram Language, is, like, so suppose you have feature space plot, right? Mm-hmm. Which is basically list plot of dimension reduce.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I'm debugging this and, you know, I want to turn on, you know, whatever, I want to see the things coming out of list plots. You know, and I don't care what happens with dimension reduce, you know, for the most part. You know, and
Yes, I see what you're saying.
And, you know, Mateo or Etienne, you know, probably is the opposite way.
Yeah, I don't think verbosity levels work well. I think what will work, and what I hope we're going to be able to do, is to make an exception handling mechanism where there are a bunch of messages that are off by default that include things like when a function returns unevaluated, and that you will be able to essentially trap those exceptions and basically return if something went wrong. Okay, let's keep going here. Graph plot, what are its weird conditions? I can't.
I mean, not much. I mean, you know, so that's probably.
Yeah, it doesn't really care what its elements are.
Right. You know, as long as it has
Okay,
a list of rules or something, it'll turn them into vertices.
Okay. Histogram. It doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, it'll ignore. You know, it'll be similar to list plot or bar chart.
Angular gauge of A. That was pretty weird. That's pretty random behavior.
Yeah, so that one would probably, you know, return unevaluated if we follow the.
We should.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just totally random what it did there. Somebody's going to say, "Oh, great, my nuclear reactor is all safe."
Right. I mean, so angular gauge, you know, has a separate feature though, which is if you do angular gauge of dynamic of A.
Why would, okay, what am I going to see here? I mean, dynamic of A isn't going to evaluate either.
Okay, and so now have a standalone dynamic of A outside. Okay, now drag the needle.
Oh, for goodness sake. I had no idea we had this. I didn't know you could do that. Is this listed in the list of controls?
I don't remember if it's there or not.
Well, it's a circular slider. Those are famous. We better check it's there in the controls list in some way, in some obscure corner, at least. Okay, so what does that do to this? That's really funky. What does that mean for the angular gauge of ASU?
I don't think it means anything. I was just pointing it out. I think that, you know, I mean, when you have dynamic of A, we know that there's a dynamic there. I mean, it's not like you're sneaking it in somehow. And so
what would happen is angular gauge of dynamic of A, if A is unevaluated, as in this case, what will it do? It will produce, what it should do in that case is produce a message. Then really, it shouldn't show this.
Well, I mean, I believe it's similar to the slider of dynamic of A.
I see, that it has to do something.
Right.
Well, I think it should at least show a message, although that's not very polite behavior when it has a dynamic. This is complicated.
I mean, it might be possible in the case of, well, I mean, this might work for angular gauge. I don't know that it would work for some of the other gauges. To initialize the needle in no man's land.
Sorry, I lost concentration for a second because I was looking at something else. Could you say that again? Put the needle where?
In that no man's land, you know, pointing due south or whatever.
I see, that would be nice. I don't think this is the world's most important thing, but it would be nice to get this right. All right, okay, so that's another category here. Let's just look at a few more.
I mean, the other thing that it could do, and I don't think it is the dynamic case could force initialization, but I don't think that's what slider does until you interact with it.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
You should try it. I mean,
Mhm.
we need to figure that out.
Yeah.
Okay. Looking at a few of these others, Geographics. Well, actually, GeoList plot. Go ahead.
Geographics decides whether something is important enough to abort immediately, like geoprojection goes to foo, or it's not very important and then it ignores it and continues. So there are these two modes.
Okay. And by continues, okay, so let's imagine that I say GeoList plot of AB.
Yeah.
That is really random, if I might say so.
In this case, it decided to ignore it and say, well, this is equivalent to basically geographics of bracket bracket.
Okay, and why doesn't geographics of bracket bracket just give the whole world?
This was something we decided initially, that it would give something local to you.
Personally, I think it'd be better if it gave the world, not least because on a computer, the location is often wrong. I mean, it's 1,000 miles away in my case. Comments about that? I mean, I personally think I would be much happier to see this geo-range to all. I mean, that seems like a much more civilized thing to do when you don't know where something is, rather than saying, "Oh my gosh!" In fact, I wanted to comment on that separately. I mean, rather than blobbing me down to, in my particular case, Champaign, Illinois, it looks like. Why not just give the whole world? You don't know where it is? Give the world.
Which, I mean, I think is what we do for, the extraterrestrial bodies. So if you do geographics of, empty list and geo-model goes to Mars.
Okay, are you telling me that we are being, that is outrageous, if I might say so. So you're telling me if I say geo-range arrow Mars.
No.
Geo-model.
Geo-model. Well, this is something we have been discussing recently. It may still have the older behavior. Yeah, it still has.
What the hell is that doing?
Well,
that's the site of the future Martian settlement.
Well, let's see. So in geographics, if it doesn't know $geolocation, because, for example, there's no internet connection or something, it will default to 0, or the whole world. And here we do basically the same thing. We are because we don't have a $geolocation Mars, a preferred position in Mars, we are choosing 0. But this is weird because nobody recognizes that point. So this has been recently changed to the whole Mars.
Okay, so let's be consistent and change it to the whole Earth as well. Is there an objection to that?
Well, I find it a bit more informed. The fact that we show the user we know where you are, $geolocation. I think geolocation is a bit special because when we have networks and VPNs, etc., then of course.
No, but wait a minute. I don't think it's useful. I mean, it is amusing to show where they are, but in the case of let's consider a bunch of different cases. Yeah. A GeoList plot with no elements. Okay, I don't see how you can justify putting a 10-mile radius on it, which is what this presumably is roughly.
Yeah.
Well, how is it different from an empty geographics?
Well, let's see what an empty geographics does. I think an empty geographics does the same thing.
Exactly, which is my point.
But I'm saying an empty geographics should also give the whole world.
No, that's a big change.
Why?
And I think that's the way, that's the way it's been, and I think that's the way people use it.
Really? When does somebody find an empty geographics useful?
Are that reliant on the behavior? I mean, but it's certainly closer to what Google Maps does. If you just go to maps.google.com.
Yeah, but they're trying to do something different. I mean,
look at the first basic example on geographics.
We can change it. It's just that we made this decision originally, randomly, yeah, more or less.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's think about this for a second. I would argue that it makes much more sense to show the whole world, I think. And partly because of the arbitrariness of the scale here, which is bothering me.
Would you like it better at 100 miles?
No. I mean, there's a very definite, okay, look, maybe there are some other issues that I'm not thinking of here, but I personally would think that geographics, okay, so there's 2 points here. First of all, this case should generate a message, in my opinion. I think it should generate a message and then show the whole world.
Okay.
Someone on our live stream is asking,
well, I mean, it can issue a message, but it should be the same, I think, as an empty geographics, just like an empty list plot gives you the same thing as graphics bracket.
Yes, yeah. Why does empty geographics have street names and GeoList plot does not?
Because the GeoVis functions don't have labels by default for the most part, because you're typically putting stuff on top of them, and and I have a whole little collection of emails of you sending and complaining about labels being present when.
Why does GeoLabels arrow true not work?
No,
that's not the type of labels that.
Yeah, this is a matter of Geo Background. What we change is the Geo Background. In Geographics we use street map, and in GeoList plot we use street map, no labels. So there should be street map.
Fair enough. What happens if I say like all here? Nothing. Okay. That's yet a different behavior, isn't it?
Yes, this is one of these cases in which we decide that something is too important to ignore. Like if you say geographics, geoprojection goes to A, it will also complain and return.
Blank output?
Yes, it's a blank output.
As opposed to what list plot of A does, which is to return unevaluated.
Yes, so yes, that's another thing we discussed initially here. So Geographics tries to be very forgiving, except when it decides that something is too important to ignore.
No, I understand that. But should it give a blank output or should it return unevaluated?
We try to imitate what plot does, and graphics does that.
Well, I mean, graphics never returns unevaluated. Right. Well, I mean, graphics only typesets, so.
But it pinks in that
yes.
case. This didn't pink.
It can, for example, if you do geographics of A, it will ignore, and behind the map it's pink. That's why there is the.
Oh, for goodness sake, that's really weird. So if I say Geo Background, that's just really weird, if I might say so. Oh, that's just obscure as hell.
Indeed.
All right, look, I think there's some cleanup necessary there. Let's just do a quick scan of some of the other, some of these other functions. Look, the main conclusion here is we're not done with this issue. Number line plot. I'm not even going to ask what that does on the unevaluated case. Well, actually, I'm going to ask that. Okay, so that does the same thing as timeline plot, which is it makes a timeline over a random period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Over a short period of time, as a famous person in the news might say.
Why does it pick 1900 to 2020, centered on 1960? That's just utterly obscure.
Well, I would imagine because 1900 is the start of dates and 2020 is the current year rounded to the nearest decade.
What do you mean the start of dates?
It's absolute time 0. You know,
Okay.
completely arbitrary.
No, I know that. But,
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, obviously the start of dates was 1977 when I was born.
Right, or 1970 when the Unix operating system thinks it is, or whatever.
Yes.
I mean, granted, it's a random implementation detail, but it's an obvious consequence of, the documented implementation.
Yeah, I understand. Although I think we're agreeing this should return unevaluated in this case.
That should return unevaluated, but timeline plot of empty list, I think we're saying should evaluate to something.
What? What about, I'm sorry, timeline plot of empty list.
Well, I mean, number line's the same. Woo.
Whoa.
Beautiful.
This is what happens when we let alpha people write Mathematica functions.
Sadly, I think timeline plot was ours.
Oh, dear.
Number line plot
that's a bug.
Started out.
Feed it to QA. That corner case should have been checked. It's rather a spectacular bug, if you ask me.
Those color swatches are really nice in there.
Yes, quite.
But
okay.
So for the question, I mean, so the thing is what, I mean, so like if you do list plot of empty list, you get -1 to 1 in each direction, which is
the default of graphics, presumably, or
0 to 1. Okay,
you get 0 to 1,
right?
Which is not the default of graphics, I believe.
No, graphics is -1 to 1 in both directions.
Okay. Well, I don't object to either of these things, but
right. My question is there a default range for number line plot and timeline plot that's right? I mean, so if you do date list plot of an empty list, you're going to get like the 1 second interval from midnight to.
That's a particularly goofy interval. I mean, I think if you do date list plot of empty list, just come on, make that a day or something.
A day or a year or just anything other than a second.
Okay. I think a year, given the name date list plot. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I would take to a day.
You think a day?
Yeah, I think it's like the most natural.
All right, fine.
And is it today? Is it a moving day?
I would say so, yes.
Okay.
It's today, midnight to midnight.
Okay.
Okay, number line plot. Well, I mean, visually, I don't object to this. It's just totally arbitrary. I mean, it's 3 point whatever. Is it
right?
5?
Maybe -10 to 10 or something.
Or -1 to 1.
I mean, if you're going to do an empty one, you might as well do one that a second creator can use for, doing their little hops along the number line.
That's obscure. It said plot range -1 to 1, and it only went down to 0.
Interesting.
It's plot range, right? Perhaps it's referring to something vertical.
Yeah,
No,
I don't think so.
I think that is a baguette as well. Is that an obviously bad result? 0 to 1?
I mean, it's not obviously bad. I would still go out to 10 or something.
What the heck's going on here?
I mean, I think what's happening is it's detecting that it has an empty list and it's short-circuiting and ignoring the plot range.
All right, okay.
No, it wasn't entirely because it was.
Yeah, I went to 0. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I guess I'd be prepared to go for 0 to 10.
Okay.
What are we doing? What was the other case we had there? Oh, timeline plot. You're 1900 to 2020. What the hell? Could be a lot worse. Fine.
I mean, we could do a century on either, the
No, on either side of the current time, who cares? If, I mean,
Yeah.
people are not thinking a century hence, unfortunately.
Yes.
Okay. Somebody's commenting the start of dates was 1977 when the first Star Wars movie was released. I thought it should be in a galaxy long ago. ... The long ago might be minus 10 million years or something. Anyway,
shall we wrap up? Given that
yeah, we're over time, but I just want to. What's that?
Given that you're 45 minutes late for your 4 o'clock meeting now.
Yes, I know. Sander comments, external observation is now that giving no input, list plot of A, or an empty plot like plot of A pinked plot, Geographics A, Geo Background to none, seems random now. I see. A pinked plot. Yeah. It's making the point that the fact that this pinks now is pretty silly, right? Because we've got all these other things. The consistent thing to do would be to pink these.
Pink what?
Well, if you end up generating a plot and the plot has no meaningful data in it, or data that is specifically non-meaningful, no, that's not even correct. What causes pinking? Why do things pink?
Things pink when the front end can't understand them.
Yeah, I understand, but that's when the thing, Sandra's saying all these behaviors seem random. That's a bad sign. That's why we're having this meeting, by the way, in case you haven't figured that out. This is we realize there's inconsistency here. Look, maybe we need a larger collection of, maybe we need to go ahead and, I'm not even going to guess what chromaticity plot. So this is an interesting case. Chromaticity plot of no elements. Oh, that's totally weird. That's weird, and that's wrong.
Why is that wrong?
Because this is useful.
Yes.
It's about the plot does the same thing. So,
no, but plot isn't useful.
Every plot requires at least one argument. Graphics does not require an argument because it's just a container. But every single plot, including list plot, requires at least one argument. Okay, but chromaticity plot paints something useful even in the zero state, effectively. In fact, Geographics would do the same. Geographics is not a plotting function.
Okay. And so you're saying GeoList plot requires something. Yeah, you're right. But chromaticity plot, well, you're claiming it does the same thing. Although why it didn't produce a caret there, I don't know. That means the documentation isn't tagged correctly for some reason. I can look at that. That's probably 20 seconds to fix. But I have to say that I would be not unhappy with a special no argument form of chromaticity plot that specifically produces, rather than having to have this hack of having no colors there, to being able to say chromaticity plot open close and have it produce the color triangle. Right, but the natural arguments to chromaticity plot are strings, right? No, not they're the color spaces, right? No, they're colors.
It can be either.
No.
It can be either.
Okay. Well, the first two basic examples are color spaces, as are the string completions. Okay. Well, look, it seems to me that we should simply document the chromaticity plot of no arguments gives the RGB color triangle, and we should make it do so. All right. We've clearly got more to do here. Just a preview. Right. Well, we can pick this up tomorrow. Well, it probably won't be tomorrow, but in due course. Oh my gosh, there are going to be. Look, I think this needs some separate work done of just looking at every one of these functions and saying, what does it do when it's fed nothing or fed things that don't make any sense? I think we're going to find yet more inconsistencies here, unfortunately.
Brett, can you comment on this?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think probably my preference would be to just start working through them and, fix, implement and fix, the obvious things and build up the collection of ones that need further discussion.
Let's do it. All right. I mean, I can't even imagine something like a Renko chart when fed no data. I cannot even imagine what it's going to do. Anybody want to guess what it's going to do?
Probably.
Empty plot with boring axes.
Okay. Well, some of the companies that exist today existed in 1900.
It's a very specific date, though.
Yes.
Or, I mean, formatting of the dates.
Right. Okay, so that's pretty random. Okay, all right, sounds good. Okay, thanks to everybody.
Okay.
Thanks to everybody on the live stream. Thanks to everybody here. See you all later.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.